All right, guys, welcome back to our teaching in the Gospel of Mark. Now, the last time we were here, we were dealing with the identity of Jesus. That is, the necessity of the disciples to truly understand the identity of Jesus. That is, he is God. And we were looking at two particular miracles. All of these things happening within the providence of God. God was in control. God using, perhaps even orchestrating the nature of these events. That's what we mean by providence. We looked at two particular miracles. Jesus on the sea, calming the wind and the waves. And notice this with the disciples, and they asked the question, who then is this man? Who is he? And earlier, how did they refer to Jesus? As teacher, because that was the extent of their understanding. Yes, you are the Messiah. Yes, you are a great teacher. You seem to be a prophet, one who is able to do great miracles, but that's the limit. You're just a man. But nevertheless, by the miracle of doing, that is, speaking to the inanimate, controlling, having power over nature itself, it bespeaks that you are more than a man. So they were literally shocked in their mind. And the question is now posited. Who is he? Then we get to the next section in chapter 5 with the healing of the demoniac of the Gerasene. And there, this miracle demonstrated Jesus' absolute power with the words of the legion himself, identifying Jesus. We know who you are, the Son of the Most High God, speaking exclusively, even pointedly, of the divinity of Jesus. So thus we have the question concerning Jesus answered in these two miracles. Who is he? He is the Son of the Most High God. Indeed, he is man, but behind the envelope of human flesh is a divine being. He is God Almighty. And so thus we see the nature of Jesus revealed. But now let me get back to the point. Let me get to the point. Because we have to understand what section that we are in, and this will keep me from doing this over and over and over and over and over. The people have rejected Jesus by calling him demon possessed. You got to remember that. Jesus began after that. There was the rescinding of the kingdom. No longer will I be your king, Israel. No longer will the kingdom prophesied, spoken of by the prophets, Old Testament. This will not be realized at this time. The kingdom is taken away from this generation and will be given to a future generation. And we know that generation still is not present. So the point is, he began to talk about a new kingdom, this new mystery kingdom, which we understand will be the church. So the importance of that, these miracles that we saw with the Jesus on the water and the demoniac of the Gadarenes, the importance of these miracles, Jesus is preparing his disciples. That's what you have to see. He's preparing his disciples, these 12 men who we know will become apostles, with the exception of Judas, who will be replaced by Matthias. But nevertheless, he is preparing these men for their future ministry in the new kingdom. The new kingdom, we understand, will be the church. And this is what was so important. In order for them to preach the gospel and proclaim the gospel of Jesus, you need to know, my apostles, who he really is. And thus, where's the question again? Who then is this man? End of chapter 4. Answer, with such voluminous material. That means Mark took his time in opening up the scripture, talking about this demoniac, this legion. And whenever the scriptures take a lot of time, they're making a point. They want to drive this point home. Who is he? Son of the Most High God. Preparation for the disciples in the future ministry of the church. But all things begin foundationally with the knowledge of Jesus, of the person of Jesus. He is God in the flesh, Son of the Most High God. So now we continue. So we're going to go on. Enough of that. And we're going to look at the remainder of chapter 5. Now, it is somewhat extensive, verses 21 through 43. And we see a couple of miracles taking place here. But what is so important to remember, stay in the context of Mark. Stay with the point that Mark is setting before us and driving home for us. Number one, the ministry of Jesus has shifted. It has shifted from the public ministry of Jesus. When we say the public ministry of Jesus, that is Jesus preaching and teaching to the public. Remember, from the point Jesus began to speak in parables, he continued that manner of preaching to the public until the day that he was crucified. So he never changed that particular manner of teaching in parables. And this is the indication of judgment to that generation for their rejection of him, calling him demon possessed, and Jesus doing all of these miracles before them. In other words, you have no excuse for your rejection. But since you have rejected me, no receiving of me as king, then there will be no receiving of the kingdom. Turn my attention, says Jesus, now to another kingdom, the building of this spiritual kingdom, which will be the church, and preparing the disciples to work, serve, and minister in the upcoming kingdom. You got to know who I am, Son of God. And now we see the preparing of them. And this is what we're going to see in these two miracles here. And I don't want to be premature. I know I always am. But this is what we're going to see. And this is what you need to keep in mind. These miracles are not just simply given in a box to show the power of Jesus, the glory of Jesus. And if Jesus healed these people, Jesus will heal you too. That is not the point of Jesus. And remember, the things that Jesus did as they were recorded in scripture. Look at the context. They're trying to tell you something. Sometimes it's not always applicable to us in this day. All right. But I don't want to go into all of that. But we continue with the theme of Mark here, building and continuing. What is Jesus now doing through these miracles? What is the point of Jesus in these miracles? Why is Mark recording them in this fashion? And the whole issue is preparation of the disciples. Now we're going to see what Jesus is trying to say in that preparation as we look at these miracles within themselves. So I hope and pray I don't be too long, even though it's a little bit lengthy, but the points are very direct and we'll explore them together. So let's begin. When Jesus crossed over again in the boat, verse 21, to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. And okay, so we remember that this became the issue with Jesus. Whenever he would come out into the public, people hear about it, they start gathering all around Jesus. But remember now, and I want you to remember these things, and we're going to highlight them as we work through the text. There is hope and expectation in the crowd. There is hope, and they ain't out there for nothing. They're not out there just to see Jesus's face, but even they themselves have certain hopes and expectation. And remember, let me just tell you the answer so you won't have to try to figure it out. Such hope and expectation for Jesus to touch them, Jesus to heal them. But remember the point that I was trying to tell you. The nature of Jesus's ministry is now changed. Even though Jesus does interact publicly, Jesus does not do certain things publicly anymore. And from the point of this concentration on this new mystery kingdom, that's the parables that he talked about, all of this because of what? The rejection of Israel, him as Messiah. Jesus rescinds the kingdom. You will not receive the kingdom. And thus, what we see now, when Jesus is doing miracles, pay attention, guys, pay attention. The miracles are not for the benefit of the public. At first, listen, at first, the miracles of Jesus, that's why you need to understand why Jesus did miracles in the first place. He didn't do miracles just to do miracles, just to say, and what Jesus did in that day. That's how we misunderstand the Bible. We misapply what's going on because we don't take scripture in context. Read the book. Read the whole book of Matthew. Read the whole book of Mark. In the context, God is speaking through Matthew. God is speaking through Mark. He is telling you the story of the gospel of Jesus the way God is trying to tell you. He doesn't want you to go off on a tangent to simply interpret events on your own. He's giving you these events because he's making a point. All right, so let me go back. So what do we see? We see Jesus did miracles earlier. The miracles that Jesus did publicly for Israel attested to the words of Jesus. In other words, Jesus did these miracles to back up, to evidence the truthfulness of what he was saying. What was he saying to the nation of Israel, to the Jewish people collectively? I am the Messiah prophesied by the prophets. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's what that means. And now, with the Messiah being present, believe in me, and thus I will bring about the kingdom that was spoken to you by the prophets, spoken to you by Isaiah and all the rest. I mean, just about all of the prophets spoke of the kingdom that the Messiah would bring. But you got to believe in me. But let me help you in your belief. Is there a person sick? Heal him. Person cannot see? Heal him. Even messianic miracles. Remember the three types of messianic miracle. To cast out demons in such a way you don't need to get the name of the demon. Dumb demon. Dumb meaning the person cannot speak. They believed only the Messiah could cast demons out of a person who is mute, unable to speak. Because the Jews needed to get the name of the demon, ascertain the name, to get authority and power over the demon so that they may cast the demon out even through the name of the demon. One of the messianic miracles. Another miracle, to give sight to a man born blind. Jesus did all of that too, right? And the healing of leprosy never had been done by an individual. So all of these miracles. So Jesus's miracle to Israel was to back up and to prove what he was saying about himself. You got it? In order that Israel may believe him and receive him as Messiah. But what did they do? Out of all the things he did before them, they still said he was demon possessed. That's why Jesus said, that did it. That did it. Makes no sense. Don't you understand? Satan does not ruin his own house. And from that day forward, what? He began to speak to them in parables. What were they saying about the parables? Jesus' disciple, why are you speaking parable? So that which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet will be fulfilled. So that they will be judged. So that's the whole issue of the thing, right? But anyway, so let's go on. So what do we have? Jesus now changes the nature of his ministry, no longer offering himself by signs and wonders to prove to Israel, the nation, the people collective, he is the Messiah. Why? He ain't gonna be the king no more. But now the miracles that he does to enhance, to buttress, to build up the faith of those who are already believing in him. Those who themselves will become members of that future kingdom, members of the church. And also, too, here is the point, and in preparing his disciples, those who will become apostles, namely, he's doing these miracles so that they will learn lessons. And we'll talk about the explicit nature, what he intends for them to learn of these lessons. All right. So no more public miracles to convince the people he's the Messiah. That is over with. He has a new focus in life, preparing his disciples for the future ministry that they would serve in. And therefore, the miracles that Jesus does now become of a private nature. No longer the public thing, but a private nature. And notice the general atmosphere that you're going to see for these miracles. The general atmosphere will be amongst those who are disciples, amongst those who are believers. What has the nation done? Rejected him. So no miracles and stuff for you. But for those who are mine, I will demonstrate certain things. But explicitly for my disciples, it's training time. It's training time for your future ministry. And he has already began. You need to know who I am, Son of God. Now the training continues. See it? But anyways, let's go on. So now Jesus is there. He's back again on the other. He's come from the Gadara, right, where we had the man with the legion full of demons. He's back now in Jewish territory in Galilee area. And so what? Verse 22. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up and on seeing him fell at his feet. This is important, but we're going to talk about it. And implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. Okay, a number of things we need to talk about. Let me take my time. Try not to get too excited. So we have a synagogue official. This is a ruler of the synagogue. His job was like, if there were speakers for the synagogue, he would kind of get all of that in order. If there's going to be synagogue reading, he would do that. If there was to be taking care of the synagogue, maintenance and management of the synagogue, that's what he did. So this is what this particular person was. He was not, it is not showing here that he was a Pharisee. That's not the point of it. But he was a highly respected individual among the people who had care for the synagogue. And this is who this man is. And also, too, we are being introduced. All were not hostile to Jesus. And thus, this synagogue ruler was a believer in Jesus. And this is the picture here, right? And always in the back of your mind, see the 12 disciples. See those 12 men following, watching, and observing. That's the point of it all. So watch. So this synagogue official, his name was Jairus. Notice he fell at his feet. Now let's talk about that. Now we see him dropping down to his feet. The idea, pleading and begging Jesus about what? My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she can be healed and live. So he has a daughter. And we find in other gospels, this was his only daughter that he had. And she was a young girl of about 12 years age. And she was lying near at the point of death. See, this explains. All right, turn on the movie cinema in your mind. You got to see it. And this is the reason why we see Mark using all of these present tense verbs. But we'll talk about some of these as we work through the text here. But let's turn on the see. So let's vividly see what's going on. The man, there's a crowd all around Jesus. You got to get it, got to get it. Big crowd pressing against Jesus, trying to touch Jesus. Jairus pushing his way, making his way through that crowd and positioning himself in front of Jesus and dropped to his knees and began to beg Jesus, please, Jesus, my little girl is at the point of death. So the sick, oh my God, I almost started preaching. She is about to die. Now you can see why Jairus acts in the way that he acts, and this will become so important as we move through the text. She is at the point of death, and he wants Jesus to come lay his hands on her to heal her so that she can live. So 2 points, and I want you guys to remember this, and this will be the driver. This is the driver here in this whole section. Desperation. What do we see with Jairus? Extreme desperation. His daughter is not just sick, she is at the point of death. So you know Jairus got to get out there as quick as he can to get the master to come back. Now notice something too. We see restraint. I love it. I love it. I want to preach. We see restraint. Why? Jairus believes in Jesus. He doesn't really know the extent of who Jesus is. He got to learn that. Jesus has already taught his disciples. Remember the whole point of the previous video? Who then is he? Jesus causing the wind and the waves to cease. The disciples wondering. All of a sudden, the next section, early part of chapter 5, Son of the living God. He is God, even in human flesh. His disciples, the 12, know this, but Jairus, as a disciple of Jesus, he doesn't understand this. He doesn't know yet. But desperation, that's what we see with Jairus. So much desperation. His daughter is at the point of death. But here is that restriction upon Jesus. Notice, here comes in faith. I love it. What did he request? Remember, it's a desperate situation. The girl is running out of time. Jesus is in a pressing crowd of people. Jairus has fought his way through the crowd. He wants Jesus to follow him back home and physically touch his daughter so that she'll get well. Number one, this was a common thinking in the mind of Jewish people that some form of I don't want to say energy, but that which would flow from the individual causing the healing. So they always believed in the touching of the individual. But remember, there was another occasion where there was a centurion who had a servant who was sick. And Jesus said to him, what? I'll follow you and go home and touch hand and heal him. What did the centurion say? No need. Just speak the word. You don't need to go to my house and touch him. I'm not worthy for you to even come under my roof. I am a man of authority. I believe that you are a man of authority. Speak the word and my servant will be healed. The point that I'm trying to make is people, you see, you're restricted by your faith. You got it? I love it. So here we see the restriction of Jairus, and Jesus allowed this restriction of himself. Not that Jesus could not do. What did he say to the centurion? I've never seen such a great faith, not even amongst my own people in all of Israel. Go. According to your faith, it is done. Not that Jesus could not, but Jesus restricted himself within the confinements of an individual's belief. Jairus believes Jesus must come and touch him. And so guess what Jesus do? This is the extent of your faith. I'll operate in that extension of your faith. I'm going to go with you and lay hands to heal your daughter. So this is what's about to take place. So what do we see? Desperation. And then we see what? The limitation. Oh my God, oh my God. The limitation of Jairus's faith. And all, keep in the background of your mind. Who's watching the show? The disciples are watching the show. One, who are they learning? Truly learning about the nature of Jesus and something about Jesus. But watch. Faith. Faith is here. Faith is here. What? And he went off, verse number 24. He went off with him and a large crowd. So notice they're keeping that crowd alive. Crowd was following him and pressing in on him. He can't walk. People are pressing him, touching him. All is thick. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years were introduced. This is another sandwich that Mark is giving us. The sandwich that we have is on the outside, there is Jairus with his desire for Jesus to come and heal his daughter, interrupted by the woman with the issue of blood and the healing that takes place there, and then finishing with the end of Jairus' healing of his daughter, or we even say resurrection. So we have another sandwich here that is given by Mark. The interruption, remember the desperation of Jairus. Jairus is on a time clock. His daughter is at the point of death. And now all of a sudden, what do we have interjected into this crowd of people, interrupting Jesus from getting to the house of Jairus, a woman with an issue of blood, hemorrhage of blood. But let me go on. For 12 years, so this woman, and this is a woman simply here, outside of her menstrual cycle, was just simply bleeding and bleeding for 12 years. So you can even imagine the weakened state of this woman. But there are other things about it. We'll talk about that. But what's important, she's a woman, number one. She's having a bleeding, continual bleeding, number two. And even so, it was for a long time. Tell me, how bad was her condition? What? She had endured, verse 26, much at the hands of many. I almost got a joke in right there. The doctor couldn't help her. The doctors were just hurting her, but they were getting paid. They were getting paid. She had endured much at the hands of many physicians, spent all that she had, and was still not helped at all, but had rather grown worse. So all of these things speak for itself. You can see this woman going and trying to, she's sick and with a debilitating disease, slowly draining the life and the strength out of her. And she goes and she seeks healing for herself from the doctors, and the doctors, in all of whatever applications and prescriptions that they were giving her, she obeying them, spending all of that money, paying for the doctor, paying for whatever cure that they may present before the woman. She finds that none of them helped her at all. They didn't get healed. She actually, through listening to them and doing what they said, it made her condition even worse. But not just simply that, what? And then she exhausted all her resources. She had no money. Now again, watch the principle that's laid here again. Don't you love it? What, Pastor Lee? Desperation. You see it now? So you have what? Go back earlier to Jairus. My daughter is what? At the point of death. Come right now, Jesus. Come right now. He's desperate. Now let's look at this woman. I spent all my money. I have no other hope. My only hope is in Jesus. I am desperate. And here's what I want you guys. Stay with me. Stay with Mark. And who's peeping all of this stuff out? Who's learning from all of this stuff? The disciples. He's training them something. Let's deal with the text. You'll see it. What? 27. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd. I like that. But see, you don't misunderstand coming up in the crowd. It was not a cakewalk coming into that crowd. Jairus didn't have it easy getting to Jesus. And this woman, even in her weakened condition, couldn't hardly get to Jesus, but she made her way. She pressed her way. Oh my God, I almost started preaching. And when you want something from God, you press. Don't you give up. You fight in faith. My God, let me preach a bit. Knock and keep knocking. Seek and keep seeking, ask and keep asking. It's like the woman before the unjust judge. Even though the judge did not fear the woman, he didn't fear nobody. He said, but the woman is worrying the devil out of me. I'm going to just do what she wants. I'm going to grant her wish because she keep on. Jesus said, learn something from that. Keep pressing, keep praying. Okay. I'm preaching. I'm sorry. Okay. What? I love that. She heard about Jesus and she came up in the crowd and touched his cloak. Now you got to understand it. Now, Mark is not concerned with the minutia. We see that in Matthew that she was actually seeking to touch his seat or the tassel. The tassel was this cord was down the waist. It was down the waist. See, I'm about to preach on you again. I'm going to stop doing that. That cord was down the waist. The cord wasn't up there. She's not touching Jesus's prayer shawl. That's not what she's touching. Oh, she doesn't want to touch that. She wants to touch that cord. And if touching the cord, that means she got to get low. You see why I want to preach? Because you got to get off of your high horse sometime when you want God to do something for you. You got to come down sometime. You need to be humble sometime. Sometimes the problem is we too much like the man that went to Elijah. And what happened? Elijah said, go and dip in the Jordan. But what did he say? What do you mean dip in the Jordan? Are not the waters of far better than the waters of the Jordan? Why is it? I thought he would come out and do some grand thing and make a big show over me and lay his hands and do all of that and call on the name, put on a big time show. But he say to me instead to go dip in some muddy water, and all of a sudden his servant said, listen, you need to come down off of your high horse. If he had told you to do something big, you'd have liked that. But he told you to do something simple. Why not just do that? Humble yourself. Okay, enough of that. She got low. Do some of us need to get low? Do some of us need to find humility when we seek God? Because you ain't all of that. I don't care what money you got. You ain't all of that. I don't care what position you have in this world. You ain't all of that. I don't care what position you call yourself serving in the church. You ain't all of that. When we really begin to seek God, we'll do just what this woman did. We'll get low. Okay, enough. What? I love it. She wanted to touch his cloak. That's what she did. She touched his cloak, for she thought if I just touch his garments, I will get well. Now you need to okay. I'll tell you more about it as we work through the text. I'll tell you some of the dynamics of custom and the traditions of that day and time that we don't see Mark talking about. But Mark is just cutting it short, saying she wanted to touch his clothes. But it was more than the clothes. It was that tassel. But let's go on. She believed. Notice again, faith is there. What did we see with Jairus? Desperation and faith. What do we see with this woman? Desperation and faith. What? Immediately, verse 29, the flow of her blood was dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. So she believed that if she could touch Jesus's tassel, his clothing, she would be well. She did that through the crowd as she pressed her way. And can I say that woman on her knees? Because she's down low. What? God gave her just what she desired. God answered her faith, and immediately on the spot, she was healed and that flow of blood was stopped. Immediately, verse 30, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Now, let's talk about that. So many things that we do not see. The woman was healed. Jesus felt that virtuous healing power come from himself. Now, the woman did not take from Jesus nothing but what Jesus was willing to give. Jesus knew who touched him. He is saying these words, "Oh, woman, who touched me?" Blah, 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 blah. Because he is drawing the attention of the disciples. See, I'm going to preach on you. Why are you making? He wants the disciples. Boys, are you paying attention? Jesus knows who touched him, right? He's going to bring teaching out of this situation. He knows. And at the same time, too, what? The woman is so fearful. But before we get there, I don't want to get there yet. So the woman touched his garment. Jesus in the crowd. Here's what you got to keep in mind. The crowd is continually pressing against Jesus. Now notice, remember when I told you they're touching Jesus? They're touching Jesus with a purpose. But she touched Jesus too. She's touching Jesus for a purpose. But she has faith. Do you get it? Yeah, they're touching me. They're touching me. And do you honestly believe and think? Because remember, one of the reasons why the crowds were coming out there in the first place, they wanted to be healed. Oh, I want to show you something there. I want to show you something there. Because the crowd's expectation was that Jesus would heal them. Shh. Notice he ain't healing the crowd. Remember, I told you, see it now? The nature of his ministry has changed. At one time, he was doing all of that. Now you don't see him doing all of that. Now you begin to see small, private-like situations begin people who with people believing in him and Jesus' disciples. You see it now? That ministry is changed, closed to Israel, closed in the sense of, I ain't going to be your king, but I will minister amongst the Jewish people to believers only. But as far as this kingdom stuff, that's off. That's done with. But let's deal with this new kingdom now. What? He says to the disciples, the crowd is pressing the disciples to look at Jesus with a sense of indignation, saying, that is a ridiculous question. You got all of these people all over you, all around you, pushing upon you, desperate to touch you. And you're going to ask, who touched you? How in the world do we know? Jesus knew. Now let's talk about certain customs and traditions. So notice 32, he looked around to see the woman who had done this. Yeah, see, he knew. She didn't take anything from Jesus. What happened came from Jesus, was permitted by Jesus, okay? And it was permitted because of her faith. Because of her what? Faith. 33, the woman fearing and trembling. See, now you need to ask yourself the question. The woman has now been healed. She should be happy and rejoicing. But instead, she's afraid. So you see extreme fear and what? Trembling. You would think she would be happy, but she said, oh my God, he'd have found out. Beautiful. Let me explain. First of all, she is a woman. And according to the customs at that day, a woman dare not even speak to a rabbi. Rabbis didn't even speak to women in public. It was almost taboo for a rabbi to speak with a woman in public. But what caused it, so that's one issue. But what's causing the woman to be shaking so violently, remember the woman had an issue of blood according to the law. Now, let's dibble and dabble to Leviticus chapter 15. I think explicitly verses 25 through 27, I believe. What? Whenever a person has an issue of blood, they are spiritually, this individual is spiritually unclean. All right. So now, also too, for a woman, whenever, according to the law of Moses, whenever a woman is on her menstrual cycle, for the duration of her cycle, the woman is unclean. And thus, she cannot participate with Israel in certain forms of spiritual worship. She has to temporarily ostracize herself from people because of her uncleanness. She's unclean because of her menstrual cycle, because of this issue, flowing blood. But remember, this woman has had a flowing of blood. How long? 12 years. So her flow of blood has been continuing. Also says the law, I think this is the latter part of that, such a woman with a flow of blood who is unclean, anything that she touches becomes unclean. The bed that she lays on is unclean. The clothing that she wears is unclean. Oh, am I about to preach on you? The clothing that she wears. So anything she touches becomes what? Unclean. Remember what the woman said? She was limited to in her mind, like Jairus in a way. And she said, if I may but touch his clothing, that tassel, if I can touch it, I'll be healed. So she wants to be healed. But what says the law? If you touch, okay, look at it. Who is she trying to touch? This one who people are musing whether or not he is the Messiah. This great prophet, this great man and religious leader, this great rabbi. Do I dare touch him? Because if I touch him, I'll make him unclean. But I need to touch him. I'm desperate. I tell you what, I'll touch just the clothes. I don't want to make too much contact with him. I'll get down low as I can get down. You see, she didn't just get down low to touch the tassel. She didn't want to be recognized. This woman, no doubt, known, unclean. She was absolute fear. What in the world, woman, are you? What are you doing in the first place? That's number one, woman. Number two, woman, you unclean. You just touched Jesus. You making him unclean. What the world you doing touching Jesus, woman? And so now you see why the woman is shaking in fear, because of retribution she fears from the people. This woman was a social outcast during the time of her bleeding, during the time of her uncleanness. Now she's desperate. She's ostracized. She's almost like a leper. And do you dare touch the Messiah? Do you dare make him unclean? So many points that we can get out of that. But let me go on. What? Now we see why the woman was so fearful and trembling. Customs of that day, words from the law concerning uncleanness. And what? Now she's afraid to death that she's been identified. Notice she came and fell down before him. And you can see the pleading and begging and like, don't be mad. Don't be mad. I was desperate, Jesus. I was desperate. But what was her belief? If I touch his clothing. But watch. He said to her daughter, right there, I want to stop. Right there. Remember, the woman scared to death, trembling, and thinking that she's about to receive some powerful reprimand. But instead, she hears gentle words that encourage her. He says, it's all right, baby, daughter. What? Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. So what does he say? Your faith has made you well. Notice, and here, boy, I'm almost about to hoop, but anyway. touching my clothes did not make you well. Your faith made you well. I'm about to talk now. See, the woman had said, if I touch his clothes, I'll be made well. Jesus said, I know you were thinking that if you touch my clothes, you'll be made well. But that's not what made you well. It was your faith that made you well. Now, let me make some outside points so I can get back to this. Because that's the problem that we see even with folk today. It's not about the spring waters or the waters that come from the Jordan that you see these lying false evangelists and false prophets on TV trying to sell you. It's not miracle cloths that make you well. It's not sending some letter to some evangelist and he praying over the letter. I've even heard of some stupid preachers said they laid their bodies down on the letter as if there's some kind of Apostle Paul or some kind of Peter himself. No. That's not what makes you well. I've heard people talk about the sword that pierced Jesus. Somehow it has miraculous power. Or the shroud of Turin where Jesus was buried in and was resurrected, that if people can touch it has wrong things, religious things, religious items. These things don't make you well. Faith in Jesus alone. See it now? And who at the side? Wait a minute. Who's watching? Who? The disciples. Who is learning? The disciples. Who is Jesus teaching and training? The disciples. It's about, what is the point here? And I'm calming down. Faith in Jesus. Faith in the person of Jesus. That's the point that he's teaching the disciples. Faith in me. Faith is never, listen, saints, I've been saying this for quite a while now. It's never faith in faith. And when you look at TV nowadays, that folk who love to talk about faith in faith. And it's all about faith in faith. Never. It's all about faith in Jesus. And notice, let's tie this into how Mark has been saying it. What has Mark just said earlier? The Son of the Most High God. You got to know who he is. And knowing who he is, you have faith in who he is. And look at those beady eyes of the disciples watching and learning according to the intent of Jesus. Go in peace, be healed of your affliction. When he said to go in peace, you can understand that. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You didn't do nothing wrong. And while I'm here, you cannot make Jesus unclean. Jesus makes the unclean clean. We saw that same thing with the leper when Jesus touched the leper. The leper was unclean. Notice his uncleanness did not transfer to Jesus. You cannot make him unclean. In the same way, the woman in her uncleanness, even though she made contact with the clothing of Jesus, her uncleanness did not make him unclean. It is Jesus who makes us clean. And he simply says at the end, be healed of your affliction. In other words, the healing will be permanent. It's going to be fine from this day forward with respect to that. Now, remember, let's go back here because now we're coming into verse 35. What's going on? We have an interruption with this woman. Interruption, teaching and preaching, all this stuff takes time. But why are we here? What's going on? It was Jairus who came to Jesus desperate, running out of time. My daughter is at the point of death. Please come right now. Please come right now. In other words, you can imagine Jairus just tipping back and forward, kind of like when you got to use the bathroom real bad, thinking in himself, we ain't got time for this, Jesus. We ain't got time for this. We need to get to my house. My daughter's about to die. I need to get there. So let's get back to this scene, the desperation of the woman continuing with the desperation of Jairus now, the attention is now refocused back on him and his situation. Remember all of the certain tenets that faith in the person of Jesus. But watch. 35, while he was still speaking Jesus, people came from the house of the synagogue official saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher? See, I'm going to preach on you. Trouble the teacher anymore. But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the official, do not be afraid any longer. See, you got to understand that any longer part. Any longer ain't in the text, but but what the translators are doing, they're bringing out that Greek in the text. Don't be afraid any longer, only believe. All right, let's go back. So now, attention is turned back. We're back on our way to Jairus' house, and all of a sudden, a group of people come from Jairus, probably a mixture of family and other people, and from Jairus' house, bringing him Jairus, news of what has now happened to his daughter. She is dead. She is dead. And they say to him, why trouble the teacher anymore? Because you went to get Jesus to come and heal, lay hands and heal the girl. Oh my God. Remember that. Remember that. And Jesus went off with them. But now that she's dead, see, let me hoop to you. Let me hoop. The teacher. Remember the disciples called Jesus that earlier. The teacher, remember that? And Jesus wanted them to know, who is he who has command over nature? And what did it say at the first part of chapter 5? The demons, you are the Son of the Most High God. He wanted his disciples to understand, I ain't just a teacher. I ain't just a rabbi. I ain't just a man. I am God, even though wrapped in human flesh. And notice, we see the extent of what the people understood about Jesus. What did they say? Why trouble the teacher? No doubt, Jairus thinks the same thing. You see, the disciples, I said, what? The disciples are beginning to understand something about Jesus. He's building on that. What have you, my 12? What have you been learning about me? You ain't just a teacher. You are the Son of God. You're going to see that in the great confession of Peter. But the folk don't know that. The people don't know that. But the disciples, they got wind of this thing. They're watching Jesus. He's teaching them through these demonstrations of power amongst disciples, not the public. What? Let's go back to the text. Your daughter has died. Leave Jesus alone. You can just let him go on about his business now. Now keep that movie thing rolling in your head. Look at Jairus. He was so desperate to get to Jesus. In his mind, he knew he was operating on a time clock. He got to get to Jesus before she died. She might die at any time. All of a sudden, they bring that news to Jairus, fidgeting, his nervousness, because he's trying to get there, And all of a sudden, he hears the last thing that he ever wants to hear. The child has died. Imagine how his arms go limp. Imagine how his head drops. Imagine how all the faith that he had, the faith that drove him in his desperation to Jesus, the faith that drove him to drop on his knees and begin to beg Jesus. Look how it now begins to evaporate, and Jesus, with the eyes of God that's in his head, Jesus sees his faith disappear. What does he say? Do not be afraid any longer. You see now, Jesus any longer ain't in the text. It's the present tense Greek verb. Jesus sees the man's faith just go away. He tells the man, hold on. Hold on. Notice, only believe. This is in the present tense. But see, here's what I'm going to preach on you again. Believe means to have faith. Believe in what? It's never about faith in faith. It's about faith in Jesus. Believe in me. But let me go back. Let's talk about it a little more. Don't trouble the teacher. You see, there are only certain things that he can do. He's just a man. This girl has entered into a state beyond him. Her point is now beyond the power of this man. Did you catch that? Of this man. Remember the whole point? What's going on? Jesus, the Son of God. The disciples with those beady eyes watching and learning what is beyond Jesus. He ain't just a teacher. What is beyond him? Nothing. What is beyond God? Nothing. Is there anything too hard for God? No. Learn this, my disciples. Not faith in faith, but faith in me. We're going to bring it all together, but let me go. And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter, James, John, the brother of James. I don't want to make a big deal, but let me just simply say Peter, James, and John, close to Jesus, allowed to get peculiar witness. Notice that's the whole issue. Witnesses, for what in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses establish the truthfulness of certain things. You see these guys again on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus go up and is transfigured once again. You see these guys again in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus went way from the rest of them and took only Peter, James, and John. These close guys to him also becoming witness. But then the general sense, the general sense of what's going on here, Jesus with disciples, Jesus with those who are believing in him. They don't really know. The disciples are getting the picture. They're getting trained for who Jesus is, God. But the rest of the folk don't. But some of them are disciples. Now watch. This is the proof of it. The disciples, watch. He didn't let nobody go with him, Peter, James, and John, right? Watch 38. Here's the 38. They came to the house of the synagogue official. Jesus saw a commotion and the people loudly weeping and wailing. In other words, Jesus got into the house, came to the house where the dead girl was. It was a common thing to have people who would wail there. In other words, these were people who would be literally paid to hoop and holler. So you would have many paid wailers there. And then, of course, those who would be genuinely affected at the loss of the child. So all kinds of things. So that's why they say it's a big commotion there with all of this hooping and hollering going on. And entering 39, entering in, he said to them, these wailers, these folks hooping and hollering, why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep. Let's go on. They began laughing at him, but putting them all out, putting them out. He took along the child's father and mother and his own companion, Peter, James, and John, and entered the room where the child was. Now, you see the point that I was trying to make here? The disciples understand Jesus. They're growing and truly to understand who he is, right? And also, too, the miracle is not for unbelievers. What do we see? He goes in. Jesus said, why make all of this to do, this fuss? The child is asleep. I can hoop on that one too, but I don't want to. But let me just simply say, and I think you're going to get it. For the believers, for us, death is sleeping. It's just mere sleeping. Life is, I ain't going to preach. When we die, It ain't over it for us. Well, for nobody really, but for the joy. I'm talking about joy. When we die, saints of God, we're just sleeping. One day, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, voice of an archangel, and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ will rise. Jesus is going to wake all of his people up. And so thus, when the saints of God die, we don't need to have a great commotion. We don't need to act a plumb fool. Why? If the individual belongs to Jesus, you ain't doing nothing but sleeping. One day, our master gonna wake all of us up who are asleep. So Jesus gave a new definition for death. It's mere sleep. Because and not only will Jesus wake up the saints, he's gonna wake up those who ain't saints, says John chapter 5. One day, all who are in the tombs will hear the voice of the Son of God and be resurrected. Watch that part. Remember that, please. But notice the response of the people when Jesus said that. They started laughing at him to show the real sincerity of their crying. And we really crying? No, you weren't really crying. You just doing what folk paid you to do with all that hooping and hollering. And notice the ridicule to Jesus. Again, this is an indication of what? Unbelief. Notice the reaction of Jesus. He put them all out and brought in only a small group. Again, point. The miracles of Jesus, no longer for public, no longer for the miracles, no longer for the unbelieving world, but for his disciples, for those who are believing, to teach them, to train them, to make them to know who he really is. It's for his people. Miracles for Israel, the miracle for the Jewish people, to prove, no more of that. No more of that. Now let's deal with the mystery kingdom. Let's deal with those who will be in this new kingdom, this thing called the church. Let's get them ready. Let's prepare them. Let's teach them. Concentrate on them. And he put unbelievers out because this was not something for unbelievers. We see this continually in the work of Jesus, how he would do things like that. That public ministry like we once had it. No more. Now private for the disciples for a reason. But let's go on. Taking the child, mother and father, help them in their faith and also help them in their ministering to the child once Jesus brings the child back to life. What? Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha kum, which translated means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Let me just continue. Immediately the girl got up, began to walk, for she was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astounded. Notice something. So now he's in the room with the dead body of that dead girl, and he took her by her hand. You see, they said he was just the teacher. If he was only a teacher, could he command her spirit from the other side and bring life back to that girl? No, sir. Remember the whole point of Mark 5 earlier. Who is this man? What did that demon say? You are the son of the most. You God, man. You God. Jesus doing something. Boy, I'm going to preach. Only God can resurrect the dead in this way. He takes that girl by her hand. He says to her, what? Talitha kum. This is an Aramaic derivative related with Hebrew. Aramaic. Some people call it Hebrew Aramaic. That's fine. And notice what Mark does. Mark, you can see Mark's gospel to a Gentile Roman. To the Gentile audience, this is proof again. If Mark was speaking to Jews, he would need to translate. He translates. Why? Because he ain't talking to Jews. He's speaking to Gentiles who would not have the slightest idea what Mark just said. So what does he do? He translates for his Gentile audience. It means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And notice he said, he puts that emphasis on the imperative rise. And he put, okay, no preaching. He puts the emphasis. Notice he puts it from the perspective of Jesus's mouth. I say, get up. I say, and who are you? Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. That's who I am. God in the flesh. I am not just a teacher. I am not just a rabbi. I am not just a man. I command life. I command death. That's why I like it when he gets into the miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead. What did Jesus say to that sister? I am the resurrection. He who believes in me, though he were dead, he will live again. And those the one believing in me will never die. Do you believe in who I am? Do you believe this? That's why I like that. I say upon the person of Jesus, his divine nature. But watch this too. You see, it slipped on some of you guys when Jesus took her by the hand and he said to the little girl whose hand he was holding. See, it slipped on you. I know it slipped by you. It was a directed command. What did I say? A directed command to that little girl. You better understand Jesus. Again, let's go back to John. I know we ain't in John, but what did Jesus tell those people? I am the Son of God, equal with God. That's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of it. Equal with God, with the authority and power of God himself. What? As God has the power to resurrect the dead, so do I. That's John. But watch, the day comes when all who are in the grave will hear the voice of the Son of Man, the Son of God. Everybody will hear Jesus say, rise, and will rise. What's so important? Why am I bringing all of that up, trying to say something slipped by you guys? Well, let's go back to John, the Gospel of John, in the resurrection of Lazarus. Notice when he gets out to the tomb, what? The place of where people are buried. Lazarus is not the only somebody dead out there. Who knows how many people are dead out there? But notice the command of Jesus. What does he say? Lazarus, come forward. He must personally identify Lazarus. For if Jesus gave the general, I'm going to preach on you. If Jesus gave the general command without restriction, simply to say, come forward, every dead, let me tell you something. Every person would have resurrected from the dead. I don't care what time, I don't care what age. Every joker who ever died would have resurrected that day. He has to restrict the power of his words when he resurrects the joker from the dead. Why? He got the power to resurrect everybody. And what does he do? He said, little girl, I ain't talking to nobody else. You and you alone rise. Told you that slipped on you, didn't it? Then the little girl obeyed the power of the Son of God, and she rose from the dead immediately and began to walk. She wasn't stumbling. Remember I told you when Jesus does the miracle, ain't no need of recovery. She was in good shape right there. Her body was alive completely. Nothing wrong with her. But watch. Why was she able to walk? That's why Mark says in verse number 42, she was able to walk because she was 12 years old, even though they've been hearing about little girl, little girl. Yeah, she ain't no little girl so little she can't walk. She is able to walk. She's 12. And everybody in the room astounded. The disciples astounded. The parents astounded. The disciples representing the disciples of Jesus who are going to take this word to the rest of the disciples, what just happened, astounded. Pondering, learning, this whole stuff. He's saying he's Son of God. He ain't just our teacher. Look what he just did. Okay. 43. And he gave them strict orders. Notice that. See, you got to catch it. No one should know about this. So let me just do it. Let me just do it like this. See it now? The ministry for Israel is over. It's over. At first, it's not about trying to walk through the crowd. So, well, maybe he was saying that so he could walk through the crowd, like he said to the man, to the leper. Don't tell nobody, because he wanted to be able to walk through the crowd and minister to the people. So he said not to tell anybody. No, that's not the same here. Why? The crowds are already all over him. Are they not? What? The man went and published it abroad. From that point on, Jesus could no longer walk openly. Jesus had to tell the disciples, get a boat. The only way I can teach and preach to the people is get a boat, because they too much on me. What do we see here? Jairus coming to Jesus. Jairus got to fight and press his way through the crowd. What do we see here? The woman, big crowd. It's not about the crowd. It's about the ministry of Jesus has changed. That public ministry, that's over with. That's why when he speaks to the public, how does he speak? Not with plain teaching, in parables. Parables teach of what? Form of judgment. That is over with. But to his disciples, as Jesus is preparing for the new mystery kingdom, the church, we see now this activity of miracles. Now you see it now? It's changed. Nobody should know about this. And he said, let's address this part, something should be given a girl to eat. The girl has been sick, no doubt, because it's so sick that she died. And so therefore, Jesus is simply attending to her physical needs. She is still in a human body. That body, whatever the sickness was, right, that led to her death, it zapped her. It wore out to the point of a death. So now that she is now back alive, we still need to attend to the body. And so what? Give us something to eat, right? So she needed to regain her health, regain her strength and all that. But as far as the healing, it's done, it's complete, it's perfect. But now what? There is still the reality of being in a body. When Jesus resurrected Lazarus from the dead, Lazarus still had to eat again. And Lazarus got a cold again. And so therefore we see the natural thing here. Jesus showing attendance to the natural care of the body. Had nothing to do with the perfection and completeness of the healing. All right, let's stop. So let's look at what's going on. Remember, you got to see it. Jesus' ministry is now changed. His concern is changing. He's only dealing with the disciples. Even the apostles, what? He is training them for their future ministry in the church. They need to understand, number one, who he is, Son of the living God. That's our previous lesson. Remember, who is this one that the wind and the waves obey? Who is he? Then coming to the demoniac of Gadara, Son of the Most High God. Question answered. So you need to know that, my disciples, when you go out teaching and preaching in all the earth. You need to know these things. What else? See, it's a beautiful thing. I almost want to preach. What? You need to have faith. You know who I am. Have faith in me. Why? There he's met with Jairus in a desperate situation. Desperate. And he comes to Jesus. Heal my daughter. She's at the point of death. What? And we understand this was interrupted with the woman. But what? Finally, after interruptions were over with, the people come from the house. They come from, don't worry about it. Don't worry the teacher. It's done and over with. The daughter is dead. It's nothing more the master can do. In desperation, don't you lose your faith. You see it now? In what? Desperation. Don't you lose your faith. Not faith in faith. Faith in me, my disciples. watching this. But now let's go back to the woman. She desperate, had this issue of blood making her unclean, weak in condition, all her money spent on all of the doctors, and just for what? Just for her to get even worse. But she believes, faith. If I just touch him, we know all the stuff about the touching Jesus from the woman and the uncleanness. But she believes if I touch him, I'll be made well. Touched him, was made well. Jesus said, woman, it wasn't touching my clothes. My disciples, it's not about faith in nothing. It's not about faith in nothing but me. Woman, your faith has made you whole. Faith in what? Faith in me, in me. And disciples, you who watching this, who I'm training, you learn it's faith in me. Even like the woman. Again, what we see something parallel with Jairus. She desperate. Still faith in me. Let me bring it to a close and say it this way. What you need to learn from this? What do you need to learn, my disciples? What am I trying to teach you and train you? What am I preparing you for? One day, you're going to preach the gospel. Jesus, the Son of God. You need to know that. You can't tell folk what you don't know. But at the same time, things will get rough. You are going to experience desperate times. Your faith will be tried. When things get rough, when things go beyond you, when you get to points of desperation, when you reach the end of what you can do, remember who I am. Remember who you serve. Remember who you preach. Faith in me during the dark times. Faith in me when I'm about to preach. Get Peter. Get John. Lock them up in prison. We just killed James, the apostle of Jesus. And you know what? We getting ready to lock up Peter and John, and we gonna kill them too. But let me tell you something. Where do you see Peter and John trembling in the prison? Faith in Dumb boys went to sleep. You didn't hear me talking. They weren't up all night. They weren't up all night. Oh my God, what we gonna do? No. They knew who he was. They knew what he was able to do. They were able to go to sleep. The angel had to wake them up. Now, if you are about to die, do you honestly believe that night, the next morning when they're going to bring you out to kill you and you're going to die, you think you're going to be sleeping like a baby or you're going to be up all night worried? They ain't worried. Why? They learned from Jesus. Faith, not in faith, faith in him. I've seen him, what he can do. I know who he is. I can rest. I can rest. You ain't heard nothing. Let's get Paul and Silas. Bring them into jail. We're going to whoop them. We're going to whoop them. We're going to mistreat them. They didn't know what was going to happen to them, but they knew they weren't in the hands of the jailer. They were in the hands of Jesus. What did they do? They began to pray. You made me preach. They began to praise him. How you going to praise Jesus? Because he is in control, man. I don't care what this look like. I don't care how desperate of the situation we might be in. We know who he is. We believe who he is, the Son of God. Our faith ain't in the desperation of our circumstances. Our faith ain't in some stupid faith. Our faith is in Jesus. And let me ask you something. Where is your faith? Have you been fooled by watching these TV evangelists, faith and faith? And then all of this faith and trying to give you some car and give you some house. That ain't what Jesus is here for. Or is your faith in Jesus? Do you know him, Son of the living? If you don't know him, then you can't have the right faith. Son of the living God. He who has ascended beyond the clouds, according to the book of Hebrews. He who is in the holiest place of the temple of God that is in heaven. He who is the high priest for his people, mediating, talking to God, making intercession to the Father on behalf of his people. This Jesus, do you know him? Because in knowing him, even in times of desperation, you can hold on. What did Jesus say to Jairus? Don't let this thing make you afraid. Don't become afraid. Keep believing. Believing what? In me. Don't let when you have difficult times, hard times, don't let it move you. Jairus, don't be fearful. Woman, your faith will make you whole. Your faith in who? Your faith in Jesus. All right. So now we through with that section. And again, the whole point of it all, the training of the disciples for their future ministry. You too, my disciples, when you get out there facing some rough stuff, remember who I am. Have faith in me. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. See you next time.